Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Collective VC Podcast. Today, we're joined by Arunjay Katakam. I'm going to provide a little bit of background, which I'm sure you're probably going to challenge and correct or provide context to, and I guess that will segue into the rest of our conversation. So, you're originally a EY consultant and accountant as well. You've co-founded multiple startups. One of them sold to Twitter. You were the founder and CEO of a cross-border remittance startup. You advise founders at DFS Labs and also with Catalyst Fund. You sort of dabbled in not-for-profits as well as startups, and are now a twice published author on both micro money transfers and now, which is what we're mostly here to talk about, Generation Hope and how inclusive economics can help us all thrive. All of the links will be down in the description for those whose interests are going to inevitably peak as this episode unfolds. But I guess welcome, and over to you if you want to just introduce yourself properly.
Thanks so much, Ollie. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And you did a great job. I've had 3 careers, so it's kind of been an interesting journey. And so from being a bean counter at EY, doing a bunch of startups and working in financial inclusion more broadly. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to talking about Generation Hope.
So the first thing I immediately got from the book was a resounding use of the word consciousness. And I wanted to just ask you what that means, because it's such a buzzword and it's used so frequently, but I really liked how you described it. So if we could just start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you see, I go back to the age of 11 when I can remember wanting to be super rich and make millions. It was at that time I was in boarding school, I was trading snacks, and that was sort of the genesis from what I can remember. And then at the age of 13, my mom introduced me to meditation. And so, I started meditating, and that was a very interesting experience at a pretty young age. And I've come to realize, and it's taken me a few decades, when consciousness does rise gradually, rather than sort of binary. But the whole idea of being conscious to something is not just awareness, that knowing it, but actually doing something about it, taking action on your awareness. So a couple of examples. For example, someone who smokes might know smoking is bad. But then if they continue to smoke, their consciousness to smoking hasn't risen. And so, that's one example. Another would be around, recycling or picking up garbage or, things like that, which is not good, but now you're doing it because you want to make a difference. So you're conscious to that thing. And this is the beauty of it. Like, you could be conscious to a whole bunch of things and yet not conscious to another bunch of things. And that's true for all of us. And so no one person has figured it all out. And my consciousness might be greater in some aspects and yours in other aspects, which is also what I like a lot, because it doesn't make anyone superior over another.
And I'm interested that you picked up on the litter example straight away. I'd wonder if you just recall the anecdote that you mentioned in the book, because I think it's a really good story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was 13 at the time, or 14, somewhere there. And we were in Goa on a family holiday, and we'd just gotten there the day before. The next morning, we went to the beach. I got myself an ice cream that I just bought as we got out at the beach, and I was just happily walking. It was sunny morning, beautiful day, and I peeled my ice cream, and I just chucked the wrapper on the beach and proceeded to enjoy my ice cream. When my older cousin, who lives in Singapore, she was like, "What did you just do? Who's going to pick that up?" And I was like, this is India, it's fine, like, 'cause she was telling me in Singapore you'd get fined. And I really cringe at thinking about that, because it's just one of those things. you're not really proud of or wanting to have done. But from that day, I went and picked that up, and disposed it in a bin. And from that day, I just never lit it again. What I had learned from that experience, was just changed my mindset.
So is it about not only the message, but the messaging as well, and then carrying these learnings throughout our lives? Because I think that's obviously a very small and localized example, but then that, I guess, had a ripple effect in how you chose to behave and, act.
Yeah, so I think for me, the underlying thing is just more, sort of the meditation practice that I do. And I don't think that is the only way, so different mindfulness techniques also help. But you ultimately need something to ground you, because, we do learn and hear a lot of things, but then we ignore them too. And are there times that I'm tempted to do something I know that I shouldn't? Of course, but this intentionality and consciousness, it's what keeps you a little bit tied to your values, more so than if you don't, have any practice in that area, so I would say that's what is underlying all of this.
I find that really fascinating as well, because a lot of the time when I've tried to meditate and do different sort of practices in that area, I find it really does reflect. I kind of think, what am I doing in my day-to-day life? Like, why am I chasing these things, or why is this motivating me one way or another? But that is a very specific type of awareness that I sometimes don't feel able to reach when I'm just, doing my sort of things that make me feel almost like an automata. Let's not get into the whole sort of free will debate. That's way too big. But a lot of the time, I really don't feel like I'm super conscious when I'm making my day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in some ways we just sleepwalk. We're just on a hamster wheel, and society, the programming is so strong, so great, that it's also hard to remove yourself. In fact, I mean, as much as I've tried, I think it ebbs and flows, because there are times when you get sucked in, and there are other times you can pull yourself out. But to be in a more conscious state, totally, you'll probably need to go to the Himalayas, disconnect yourself from everything. We are up against algorithms that are trained against, billions of people that know exactly what they're trying to do. And, we are just nowhere near like the mastery over our minds that we need to combat those sort of things.
What was the point when your sort of detachment from your values and how you really wanted to live your life and be aligned with that sort of more conscious understanding? When did that culminate? And I kind of want to delve into sort of your career here and the learnings you gathered along the way, and what you see a lot of people falling into, what you would consider to be pitfalls or sort of noble goals, but potentially likely to be swayed.
Yeah, so I don't think there was like one point. There were, I would say, many points. I think the first one I can remember was sort of 2007. I was on this path to investment banking, and a friend of mine said, look, you need to be so greedy to succeed in this industry. The greed, like should be willing to knock your granny's teeth out to melt the gold. If you have that level of greed, then yeah, go ahead. And I immediately knew that was not me. And so that, I would say, was like one turning point. And then there were, subsequent ones as well. 2016, I think, was another one where, partly my first son was born, partly, just a few different things coming together. But I was like, I remember actually one thing very specifically happening, like after my son was born, for the first month, we had a package arrive almost every day. We needed something, or we were trying to buy different things to solve some problem, like sleep and this and that and everything. And so Amazon, you just go on Amazon, see what you need, buy it, and I was like, this is crazy. This is nuts. It has to stop. So we said, okay, we'll order once a week on a Monday, we'll collect everything we need. And within a month, I decided, okay, this is still like we've reduced the number of packages and the deliveries, but we're still buying a lot of stuff. So I decided, sort of like a month after that, it was my birthday, and I decided I was going to spend a year buying nothing. Did that. It was a really interesting experience, and I didn't buy anything for myself. So I, still bought for my son or for the house or something, but like nothing, no new clothes, no shoes, no gadgets, no, like literally nothing for myself. And I then shifted more to a replacement model after that. But it was a really interesting year. So I'd say that was another sort of shift. And subsequently after that, I think, I started really thinking about this sort of scarcity and abundance mindset. I'd read like a couple of books on it, and I'd gone on a financial course, and I was really working on that. But it wasn't until May of 2020, when sort of COVID and lockdowns really set in, that I realized, there's something fundamentally wrong with our economic system and the way, people are remunerated and rewarded for the work that they do. Fundamentally, my industry, which is international development and financial inclusion, in the 10-year period leading up to the pandemic, had added 500 million people to bank accounts, and that's excluding India and China. And my realization was not only those 500 million, but like about 3 billion people just had nothing in their bank accounts. The way economics is set up, the system that we live in, is so heavily extractive that people just didn't have anything to fall back on.
And you described that banking, and it's often, people, you hear it so much, we're helping the unbanked, but you described it as almost like a dress code, right? It's just because you're giving them an invitation, it's not really as emancipatory as people like to say it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's needed. But it's the first step, but it's just the journey doesn't end there. And the entire gig economy, the 0-hour contracts, all of this, just the fabric of society has shifted so much without us actively knowing about it. Because of the machines, the algorithms, the tech, all of that. Before, if your boss wanted to decrease your salary, there would be an uncomfortable conversation that happened. I mean, today, algorithm just decides how much you earn.
Yeah, and this was something I gathered from the book as well, kind of very similar to sort of what Yanis Varoufakis talks about, right? The sort of digital feudal ideas. Yeah. The algorithmic hiring and firing and axing. And I want to bring it back to the gig economy. I don't necessarily agree with this, but it's a meme I saw on Instagram the other day, and it was someone sitting looking at their phone, and it said, "Oh, it looks like there's a torrential downpour outside. I think I'll just get a migrant to deliver my food for me," or something, or a minority. And people were like laughing in the comments. And it is a generalization of the type of people that occupy those gig economy roles. But it did resonate in the sense that, is the value add provided by those platforms enough to really justify some of that treatment of those people who are sort of expected to fulfill these roles? And as a society, do we demand far too much of people to sort of occupy these now, I would consider, very sort of serf and feudal relationships?
It's absolutely not. I mean, this is, I call it algorithmic dehumanization. It shouldn't exist in this way. And the way it's also packaged and sold, like these platforms are creating employment and lifting up people's lives and things like that. but it's not really sure. Some people are better off working in these jobs, but their dignity is taken away from them, and I think that's the problem. I think when you think about what do you want from a job, you want to be able to contribute to society, but you also want to do it with dignity, and especially in today's world, I think that's a problem. In India, they had come up with a 10-minute guaranteed delivery window for food and groceries. You could imagine like what was happening there. People and there were massive financial incentives to do that. And if you have an incentive to do something, well, if you don't, it's like a disincentive, right? It's like a penalty. So gig workers were getting on their bikes, driving faster than they need to, trying to, cut lights and like basically risking their lives in order to meet this delivery at time. And so there's a huge amount of backlash, and ultimately the platforms removed it. But you could see where this was going. Of course, customers loved it, and they were like, why can't this happen? It started with, I guess you might remember, like something like Domino's, 30 minutes of free, but 30 minutes is reasonable. Like 10 minutes is just not. So there are many things that the platforms do, in order to, from their point of view, it is like to be more profitable, to be more, more valuable, all of that stuff. But the way I see it, it's just to be more extractive.
On to the next question, which is, who is responsible? And is that even the right question? A matter of responsibility or sort of collective uplifting of how we think and react?
So I strongly believe each one of us is responsible. And that's what I was, it comes back to the consciousness theme. And I'll give you one example. Like I've been vegetarian for a little over 20 years. And 10 years ago, even in London, I couldn't, I could get one veggie dish in a restaurant. And sometimes it was even slimmer pickings than that. The chef would have to ask the chef to make a dish. Or, I've had just a salad, and I wouldn't even, call it a salad. It's just like green leaves, But, last 5 years or so, it's been amazing, right? Like I am spoiled for choice. I have, I can choose from 3 or 4 items, and all this because of veganism, which has really. So
you're welcome, by the way. You're welcome.
And how did that happen, right, Ollie? That is each person making a choice and saying, this is what I want to do. Right? There was no sort of magic wand. And restaurants have, and the industry has, the restaurants, all of them have responded to, each person making a choice.
So it's conscious consumption as well as voting with our wallets?
Yeah, I would say it's conscious consumption for sure. And we're always voting with our wallets, always, whether we know it or not. So as we choose to do something different, the money follows it. And that's where this is really sort of coming to its own, because you've got vegan restaurants now, like 100% vegan restaurants. You have a lot of vegan food in the supermarket, like half an aisle that like previously just didn't exist, in terms of space there, but also the products on there. And all this is it's sort of market creation, all based on the fact that there is this increasing demand for these products. So to that end, yeah, the voting with our wallet is part of any action. So we also vote a hell of a lot on things we shouldn't be voting for, which is the flip side of this coin, in that we are in control. Like if everybody stopped buying from Amazon, not even everybody, even if 10% of the people did, they would feel it,
Mm.
and they would have to think about doing something different, or so it is, yeah, it's connected to everything. And why do I say we are in control? Because everything we do either perpetuates or changes it, and it changes if we increase our consciousness to that and make that change. But if we continue sleepwalking and just doing things on autopilot, we are accomplice in the whole thing.
So now for a maybe uncomfortable question, why is your book listed on Amazon then?
Yeah, excellent question, Ollie. So I decided to go through an indie publisher and not with one of the big publishing houses, so that I could control a number of these things, including how it was distributed. And one of the things is that all of the profits from the book go to Acumen, which is a global nonprofit working to tackle poverty. And so I was not planning to list it on Amazon, because in 2021, my wife and I came off Amazon Prime. I sold my shares in Amazon, and really didn't want to do any of this. So ultimately my publisher convinced me that I needed to meet people where they are at and then take them to a different place. But if I went and set up somewhere else where there was nobody, my message wouldn't reach, its intended audience. And I think, that was a sort of a fair point. And so to that end, it's there. But at some point it may not, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
It's a good answer, and it does make sense. And I think it reflects the level of embeddedness, all of these things into our lives. For example, I'm somebody with ADHD, and making consistent changes are actually quite difficult. This relates to Amazon, because if I remember something in the day that I know I need, if I don't immediately write that thing down, it's a very fleeting thought, and I know it might not return to me. And so the idea that there's something at my fingertips, which can mean that the following day it will be at my door, I find incredibly useful, but I also have this overarching sense of guilt. What do you think about entrepreneurs, for example, who are trying to build alternative models?
Jeff Bezos said 10 years ago, or a little more than, I think 2011, so more than 10 years ago, that for the next 10 years, he could see two trends going to be the most important: how cheap you could get the price, point down to, and how quickly you can deliver. And he said these trends will outlast, and, interestingly, I found that that's certainly some people no longer the case. Like people like me and a good percentage of millennials are willing to pay a little bit more to get the same product, pay a fair price. I'm also similarly, and I still have the stats in the book where there's studies and people say they'll wait a little bit longer. In fact, I mean, we were doing that already. Like I said, from 2016, we're just putting things into a cart and then checking out once a week. And practices like that. In fact, Amazon themselves caught on and put an option for you to bulk, get your items together. So you just wait a couple of days longer and you get everything. I mean, you still have the option to get them in drip and drab, as and when each product is available, but more people are choosing, to bulk it up. And so, that's an interesting change to this trend of faster and cheaper. And in fact, Amazon itself, busted on price, no longer the cheapest, because they're looking at price elasticity, and thinking how much can we gauge here? If someone is not kind of shopping around, which is tends to happen quite often because you're so sort of addicted to Amazon. So now they're able to play with the price and dynamically price. The price you see may not be the price I see, things like that, right? So it's a really sort of again, the algorithms we have against. In terms of entrepreneur, somebody else building another product. I mean, people have tried, they've been acquired, all of that stuff. It's just such a capital intensive thing. And, one of the hardest things in the UK of not using Amazon is that there's no real alternative. There isn't one, but that doesn't mean there won't be one. There's if you look at bookshop.org, it's an amazing service. It's a B Corp that supports indie sort of bookstores. And what they've done is they have a front end, great customer experience, all of that good stuff. And then they send the orders down to the bookstore closest to you, who then fulfills the order. And, they pass on so much of the money to these bookshops. So they have a figure of how many million they've sort of raised for bookshops. And so this is part of, in the second half of the book, I cover B Corps quite a lot, and all of the different ones that are actually making a difference, and they're choosing to do that, and then we are choosing to buy from them. So I try to buy all my books from bookshop.org, for that very reason, and similarly I support as many B Corps as I can. So interestingly, I still use Amazon as a search engine. I find it a great place to find product. And then once I find the product, I stick it in Google and see who else will sell it to me. Now that's a workaround, that I've found. But yeah, ultimately it's down to your intention.
For sure. I'm interested. You mentioned B Corps. I was recently at Purpose Fest in Bristol, which was like the B Corp festival here. That was a great day. And B Corp do something very great, which is make it really easy, right? If we build trust in B Corp as a kind of like an auditor, in the sense that they check that these companies are actually who they say they are, and people also lose their B Corp status, right? So we know it's not just like something that can be acquired and dropped. So that building of trust is really essential. But I also wanted to mention and ask the question of, what do you think about these sort of ideas that were emerging kind of in 2021, but also long before, of just skipping out the middleman and building digital products, maybe in Web3, just connect via to seller? You kind of touched on it when you spoke about like risk capitalism versus rent capitalism.
It depends on the industry and things like that. The middleman is not always the bad guy. They play a role in getting products to the market. It's everything, like even capitalism itself is not bad. It's just when you take it to an extreme. So anything that is, becomes extractive is problematic. But the thing in itself may not. So I just wanted to caveat that, saying, because like all middlemen are definitely not bad. And sure, I think, Web3 is phenomenal. The potential we just starting to see a little bit, and it's going to be phenomenal in the next 10, 15, 20 years, because it completely changes the paradigm. And if businesses don't innovate and move, they will die. And we've seen this cycle now much faster. Like Kodak was lived for 50 years, Nokia much less, BlackBerry even less. It's getting shorter the cycle. So there is a huge amount of potential there that, because of the incentive to own on Web3, alongside, your purchases and things like that, so you can own something. There's a big incentive to shift, to make behavioral change, and can genuinely drive, a lot of co-op type platforms and things like that. But generally technology is technology. It can be used for good and bad. So I'm not saying that necessarily all of this is going to come good. It depends on entrepreneurs. How more conscious entrepreneurs, and we're definitely getting loads. That's why the B Corp movement is gaining so much momentum. It's going to lead to more conscious services, products and services, and things like that. So I think that's like, coming back to the first question that you asked me, I think it's a lot of it is tied to that.
And I don't want to just turn this whole discussion into something about Web3, but I am curious what you think how that ties into macroeconomics and the global monetary system. There's a lot of talk in your book, rightfully so, about the money that gets injected and also used to bail out markets that are deemed too big to fail. And I think things like Bitcoin and reading the Bitcoin white paper and just other materials in that space seem to be people who really just wanted out of that system, where people who were closest to the money printers were obviously the most better off, and companies who were just really itching for another hit of that government money. And I've always found it quite problematic that banks always just following government set interest rates. I think, for example, when I walk into a bank and I feel like I have something to prove, and it's not like the banks are competing for my attention, but I'm competing for the bank's attention.
Fiat, in terms of like fiat money, which is sovereign currency, is very much here to stay for many decades. I think Bitcoin is truly amazing. It brought us the blockchain technology, and also a currency that could potentially be an alternative. But equally, like people said, like, look, when governments print money, Bitcoin will rip because it's limited and all of that stuff. That didn't happen. In fact, when governments raised interest rates, Bitcoin tanked. People took the money out of Bitcoin to stick it in more interest-bearing products. So I think it's still so early, so nascent, the whole thing, that it's going to take time. Stable coins, for example, not very stable. When we've had many examples of them depegging from the 1:1 ratio, including like Circle and SVB went bust last year. So the biggest ones have all depegged, so they're not entirely stable. And I see that on the currency side, but equally, I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a huge amount of innovation through not just blockchain, but also AI. And, so we already have cloud and mobile, but this mash of all of this coming together is what's going to drive the innovation. My guess is that most of it will be on the regulated side, and most of it will be using sovereign currencies, but with huge amount of efficiencies. So I think financial services in the next 10 years is going to be hyper efficient. That's what we're going to see. And then, from there on, we'll see where it goes. But I think the problem, like for me with Bitcoin, is like 500 people on the majority of Bitcoin. So it's not a wealth redistribution thing, or, like there's some very set people who are there to benefit from it. So I'm not sure it's going to be like Bitcoin's going to save the world, for example.
I agree with that. I think wealth inequality is something that really bugs me, because I have a lot of views that align with freedom, and I understand why people kind of bootleg billionaires and think that they wouldn't want their wealth taken away if they were in that position. But then my sort of values of freedom also come into the understanding that to have a lot comes at the expense of other people having not very much. And I think that's where kind of libertarian thought falls in on itself a little bit, because de facto to have is also to infringe sometimes. So in the sense of Bitcoin being a protocol of wealth storage, what do you think about, for example, wealth timers, or introducing some sort of timing, the period of time someone's allowed to keep an asset without spending it? Because I think this might be able to bridge the gap between people who want to keep wealth and also retain status, but also reducing the incentive just to hoard and allowing people to stimulate economies.
I mean, there are many sort of policies that we can take to kind of make the world more, let's say, less unequal, because I don't think we need to have equality. The gap at the moment is just far too great, and that's what needs to change. So Yanis Varoufakis has this other book called Another Now, which is a very fascinating sort of piece of fiction, where he says, imagine this other alternate world which took off. So it's now like 2025, but this all movement sort of forked at the global financial crisis in 2008, and it paints a really interesting world where um, people don't actually accumulate wealth in the ways that the world does today, but have access to all of the things they need, and it's kind of like there is some universal, not some, but there's an element of universal basic income. There is one share, one vote, but there's also incentive because you get paid bonuses based on your coworkers thinking voting for you, or they have like say 10 votes and they give it to whoever they think added the most value in that quarter, and some bonuses are decided on that basis and things like that. So property as well is managed through local councils and things like that. So there are ways in which we can do things differently, some more radical than others. And I think from my perspective, I'm not quite like, I think we definitely need all like new things, new ideas. I don't think there's a silver bullet. And so I wouldn't say this is the policy that's going to change everything. I think it's just a lot of different policies, but all of that will come from a rise in consciousness. Because ultimately, any government is for the people, by the people, and of the people. And if you have, a population that's not very conscious, you're going to get a government that's not.
I agree. And I've written many essays on this in my sort of undergraduate politics degrees because I'm really obsessed with realpolitik and how people enter politics. And I think politics as a discipline, especially political science and international relations, views states and governments as these sort of inhuman entities, and even corporations as well. And I just, there was a point last year when I was seeing Biden approving that expansive fossil fuel project. I can't remember the name of it now, but I literally messaged some people on LinkedIn who are working for that company, and I would just ask them, why are you doing this? I'd love to have a chat with you because I don't understand how anyone can sort of reach that level of cognitive dissonance. And I'd also like to sort of segue that into young people in my generation. I don't know when you say Generation Hope if you're referring to a particular generation. But for my generation, I feel like people around me and students, the amount of debt we're getting into, for example, because university has been so commercialized and placed as this individual burden, that there almost seems to be no choice other than to strive for the career that makes us the most money. And obviously there's so much pressure to do that. Bring this back to venture capital as it's a sort of overarching theme of this channel, in the sense that I see venture capital as an interface between serious money and the sort of change that can happen. And obviously there's sort of expectations there and set norms and practices. But could that be an industry where people who might have otherwise gone into other harmful industries just on the premise of wanting a high salary, could that be an industry where both change and money can collide? I'm curious on your thoughts.
So I think, the first question you asked is, which is the generation? So I think for me, Generation Hope is really about the millennials and the zennials. They're the two generations, mine and yours, that are driving this shift. But I think consciousness is not exclusive to our generation. So older generations as well, they are conscious people who want to see change. Probably fewer number than our generations. But I think overall, we need this generation to cycle through to actually make all the changes that we want to see. In terms of the, going after these jobs and needing to pay back all this is what I call society's programming. Like, why does status matter? Who defined it, for example? Society, right? Like, and you keep hearing it. Your friends will tell you, your family, everyone's going to tell you, oh no, this is the way, this is how this should be. So that's like all the time being reinforced upon you. And if you do something different, like people will be, hey, why are you taking that risk? Like, but the reality is like everything's a risk. Nothing is, like it's not like if you get a job at Barclays that you're now sort of made for life. Like at any time they could just like chop you off, right? So, self-employed. In fact, you're backing yourself. You're probably less risk if you go down that route than working for a corporate who might just end your job whenever they feel like, whenever the spreadsheet tells them that it's not working out for them. So I think those are some of the things that society, the societal programming that I say that really keeps us from following our passion and dreams. Now, in terms of the VC industry, the last 20 years, particularly, overall, a lot of interesting things have come out of it. But, equally now, I don't know if, it's still fit for purpose, probably needs to be reinvented a little bit. The thing is that to return a fund now, you just need absolute, you need a unicorn out of each one. Even a unicorn's not enough. It has to be a decacorn, and I was hearing someone say like 50 billion valuation is kind of like the minimum. So that's all taking it very much to late stage and up to one end of the market. And so I'm not sure necessarily that's going to solve the problem either.
I guess I was looking for a method is a vertical ascension, so people can put in effort and they get out something that's tangible and they that status. It's not as holistic. It is tied to finances, obviously, but it's also tied to, I built this or I solved that problem. But I also see that a lot of the real wealth that's sat around, for example, in family offices and institutions and corporations, I feel like if VCs weren't available, just wouldn't be getting deployed at the level of frequency. I know you mentioned that the industry probably needs a reshuffle, but I really want your thoughts there because I understand you did a little bit of time in venture building and also as an exited founder. So I guess you understand the sort of dynamics of that sector quite well.
Yeah, I think I do, at least, to some extent. Family offices, super interesting. They do invest in a lot of LPs that get down to the VC funds. I think 10 years ago, there was a lot of seed. There was a lot of, it really was a way to get ideas going. Today, many of those accelerators don't exist anymore. Even Techstars is not able to continue, as I understand. And all the angel investing, all of that early seed is kind of disappeared. Like, people are raising a seed round now in like 1 million, 2 million, and they're calling it pre-seed. Like it's kind of nuts, right? When you think of it that way. Yeah. So, but your original question being, have they democratized access to capital? I would say sure. Compared to banks, absolutely. But is that the only way? And so I think two things. One is it's not as good as it used to be, because of the shift towards late stage and bigger and better. And two is that I don't think it's the only thing. There should be other mechanisms to provide capital and opportunities, and there'll be a lot more innovation.
VC is in itself very extractive and it relies on liquidity events to make money. I wonder where that pressure emerges from, if it's just LPs looking for the returns that are necessary. And if the industry can be freed of pressure, then maybe it can sort of work to build even more impressive companies, but either financially or in terms of impact.
The pressure is immense. And it was just yesterday I saw an article that said that 49% of founders are willing to quit their job in the next 12 months. It's an article in Sifted, and it says 49% of founders say they're considering quitting their startups this year. And it's got a whole lot of other data as well. I think my favorite thing here was, so we're taught as founders, be visionary, focus on purpose and the objectives. but your investor will be unforgiving and ruthless. I thought to myself, these people who backed me, who told me they believed in me and my vision, were waiting for the opportunity to capitalize on any weakness. That is what it felt like. They present themselves as allies, backers, support, as founder friendly, but that was not the case for me. Maybe I was naive to think otherwise. We don't need another mentoring session, webinar, or workshop. We need funding. So you can see, it's a difficult funding climate. It's a fascinating read. And 85% of the founders said they suffered from high stress. People just want their lives back. I think that it's quite challenging in today's climate.
So yeah, on the topic of funding and that climate, I guess the overall notion of CSR, or at least a lot of it, was that the good companies are also more profitable companies. And I remember the example given in one talk I watched was, I think Marks and Spencer's used to provide meals for their staff, and that actually turned out to be a really good business decision. And I wonder if you think that's kind of just a cop-out, or if CSR really does make sort of profit and purpose more in sync.
So you said used to, so does that mean they don't anymore?
I think they might have stopped. I don't know if this was a really long time ago. I'll have to check that, but...
Yeah, you see, and that's part of the problem. Like with change in leadership, things change all the time. So CSR is not a bad thing, but a lot of companies will just do it lip service, and that's not a good thing. So when it's genuine, sure, purpose and profit can definitely go together. But how genuine is it? How intentional is it? Is it just for the sake of appeasing, the public? Smokes and mirrors, or is it actually genuine? I think that's where, for me, the rubber meets the road.
Awesome. There was a quote in your book that I thought was quite interesting, when you mentioned to the third way, which was talking about transformative changes starting within ourselves, and that expands into our community. And I thought this was quite interesting because I recently watched a debate between Zizek and Jordan Peterson, and essentially Peterson was saying that to create the change you want to see in the world, it has to begin at home. Get your home in order and then go out into the world. Zizek was saying that what if society and the wider world is what's put your home in disarray in the first place? And therefore, would changing society not be the result you want to see in terms of making your life better? I thought it was a really interesting conversation, and maybe you could add some insight there.
So I would totally agree that society has made our home in disarray. But equally, I would agree with Peterson in that we still have to clean that up and put our house in order, and then go out and, because if we don't, how are you going to change society? Right? Like, that's the problem. And for me, the epiphany here was that we are each responsible, and not once in 5 years when we go to the ballot station. That's not the responsibility I'm talking about. I'm talking about every day, every minute, every hour, every decision. We can make a change, and one change leads to another change, and that's how we drive change. And if we can do things collaboratively, then it's going to have an even greater impact. But waiting to be collaborative and not doing what you think is the right thing yourself, again, I think that's a mistake. So we just need to make the changes that we want to see happen, and get, from there will be a ripple effect.
And that's something else that I picked up on in your book. You said that society is not the way it is because it's been directly programmed or written down. There's no explicit rule book. And because it's inherited, everyone inherits it in their own way. The decisions we all make are actually the substrate of what constitutes society. And that really resonated with me because at age 21, I'm at a point where I'm thinking about the decisions which are going to probably impact the rest of my life. But I hadn't really thought about it from the perspective of impacting how society continues from here on out. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's there. It's like it's a shadow, it's there with us all the time and everything we're doing.
this is probably mentioned in the end of your book, giving advice to people around my age about going forward and leading these lives of purpose and finding our own sort of value principles and what matters to us. What would be some advice in that area?
I think, each one of us is different. We all have our own beliefs, values, and I think that's great. Like, if all of us did the same thing, we would be like robots. No one would really want to, diversity is such a key part of, the sort of the interesting connectivity we have within us and how we learn from each other. So definitely follow your passion, follow your heart, do what you believe in, because that just makes life so much more fun and interesting. And then find different ways to raise your consciousness. Watching documentaries, just being curious about different things. I think mindfulness as a practice is also gaining a lot of momentum. So that helps close what's also called the intention action gap. Where we have an intention to do something, but the action is lagging. And stay true to yourself, because ultimately, that's really all that matters. So I don't think it's like rocket science and that we need to, do really back stands and, black flips and handstands and things like that. It's just, and then one other important thing that I always think is, it doesn't have to be binary. You could, like, veganism is great, and like a lot of people, like yourself, have gone off and made and become vegan, fantastic, but there's also flexitarians, like people who but they're making a conscious choice to decrease the quantity of meat they consume, and that's great too, and we should celebrate them as well. Not just the ones who had all the willpower in the world to make that binary change, but those who are on their journey towards that same point. And they might never get there, but the fact that they left the first point and have moved is great. And I think that's true for every aspect. The more you can, reduce either consumption or, the more you can change certain things for the positive, for the better, it's all good. This narrative that it has to be all or nothing, I think, is unhelpful.
Because nobody is society, right? And if the mean average of society has shifted in its weighting, that's definitely a positive change. And maybe that will lead to more people, finding that detachment from stigma or ease or just whatever it is in them to maybe make it a step further if they see a sort of more broad acceptance of just making this gradual change.
Absolutely. It will encourage others and drive the ripple effect.
I used to be a really judgy vegan until I realized that, everyone's on their own journey, and there was no amount of arguing and shouting that was getting me anywhere. So I'll have calm conversations about veganism, but at the end of the day, you're definitely right. It's about, accepting progress for what it is and not hating on people. What do you think about the phrase, you're either living to eat or you're eating to live? So in the sense of eating to live, meaning that it is your means to whatever other goal you're trying to fulfill, or it's, really living with the goal to just consume and gain?
Yeah, okay, great. I talk about scarcity and abundant mindset, and it really speaks to this. We live in scarcity so much of the time, and that's bad, because when the pandemic started, everyone had too much toilet paper. You'll remember in September 21, when there was rumors of a fuel shortage, everyone had filled their tanks, there was no fuel. Like every time, this general scarcity mentality is bad for us and bad for society. And what we need is an abundance mindset. And so the shift towards that, we live in a very abundant world. It's not equal just yet, but we have so much, and we're going to have so much more as technology continues to evolve, both in terms of compute power, in terms of solar and wind, and all of the different energies. that will come. So we just need to continue developing ourselves more into carrying an abundant mindset and creating abundance for all.
I agree. I love that. There was a section on education and the values that we ascribe to education and how the education system is structured. And you included a quote from the founder of Khan Academy, which is incredibly vindicating and validating to me about how, education currently is just memorize imperfectly, build on top of that imperfectly. And if we did anything else in society like that, buildings would be falling down, right? So how do you see a reformation or an improvement of the education system, or even just means of education, whether that's via internet, as a way of sort of generating a lot of the change and hope that you want to see in the world?
I think education is one that we're so heavily tied to. I think that is it's not going to be it's not the first thing that will change, and it's going to be hard because people are really, really married to their ideas of education. For example, I had a colleague, his son and my son are the same age, and one day he asked me, how's he doing on this math homework and all that? And I said, my son actually goes to alternate school. There's no homework. It's very child-led, child-centric. And he was like, "What? You're experimenting with your child's future?" So I was like, "Well, yeah, um, I don't see it that way, but and I truly think with AI and ChatGPT, the game is up. Like, what are our kids memorizing? Like, you could just ask Chat, so it baffles me. But the institutions are strong, and it's going to take time to break these molds. Ken Robinson has the most viewed TED Talk. I think it's over 75 million views. And he says, his talk is, "Do schools kill creativity?" And that was in 2005. We know that's absolutely true. Yet, 20 years on, very, very little has changed. So I think it's a very slow process. We have to change first, and if we do, then we will change what we do for our kids. They don't have the agency to make those changes, so it's the parents who need to do it.
I see sort of individualized learning pathways relating to interest and actual genuine fascination about a topic. You wrote that you were in the back of the class playing chess, and it was literally me. So yeah, I think a world where a kid can be exposed to a sort of wide surface area of topics and then choose to pull one of those in more closely to what their center of learning, and in that sense everybody has this sort of generalist understanding, but with these deep specialist threads, especially if you get in early, right? And I feel like I sort of floated my way through school, and it's funny, the class I sat at the back playing chess, the teacher just accepted that I wasn't going to study that thing. And it was a geography, and she was called Rosie Park. She was a great teacher, but she was so enthusiastic, and she got to the point where she knew I didn't care about geography. And then GCSEs rolled around, and I ended up just laying out the textbook pages and copying them all word for word and just memorizing the whole thing on repeat. And I did very well. And she came up to me on results day, and she was just like, "What happened? Why didn't you? Why weren't you engaging this whole year? I thought you were going to fail." It's not that I didn't want to do well in the exam. I just saw the exam as the only part of this thing that I actually had to care about, not the subject itself. And so long as we're putting in these milestones that don't actually relate to learning and really integrating and developing a passion about a topic, then we're never going to have kids who care about what they're learning.
No, absolutely, Ollie. And I think, it's great that we played chess at the back of the class. And I don't know if I wrote this thing, but it was chess that literally it's helped me so much, because at the time I was not doing very well in school, and my teachers were all over me in that sense. But I was really good at chess, and that told me that actually I'm not a dumb kid. Because if not, that would have been the narrative that was sold to me. because I just fit into that system and I wasn't getting the grades that were expected.
Recommend anyone to learn how to play chess, even if it sounds like the most boring thing in the world. For me, it's because it taught me how to lose, because losing is inevitable. And I'm sure I've lost far more chess games in my life than I've won. I don't want to actually pull up that chess.com statistic because I'm sure it won't make me feel great. But at the same time, you've lost because of a mistake you've made. I think if I ever have kids, I will encourage them to play chess. And I encourage parents to teach your kids how to play chess. And everyone goes through chess in the same way of just losing until they work out what works and works out what doesn't.
No, absolutely. My eldest son learned or expressed the interest at 5, and so I taught him, and he started playing. But equally, I also I have this close affinity to chess. I love it, and yes, you're absolutely right. You learn from it. It's quite scientific in that there's no luck involved. It's pretty much pure skill. But I think one of the things that I'm trying to get my kids to do more of now is play collaborative games. There's one called Pandemic, and then I've found a couple of others. So where winning is collective. So when we sit around the board game, there are 4 of us, and we all win or we all lose. And that way there's less infighting between everyone. I used to be hugely competitive. I'm not anymore. And I see that as a shift, a positive shift. And partly my wife saying, I don't want to play with you, you're too competitive.
Yeah, I've had many relationship damaging arguments over board games. We have to stop playing Risk because of that reason, because it's based on mistrust and deception. So have you ever watched the film Arrival?
I don't believe I have. No.
I would definitely recommend it. It's relevant to this because the story is of a PhD linguist. She's incredibly talented, and she gets approached by the US government to essentially communicate with the first alien species that have landed on Earth and interpret their language. And it's an incredibly good film. Cool. Cinematography is brilliant. Same director as Dune. But there's a scene in the film where she's communicating with all of the other superpowers on the world stage who are also trying to talk to the alien. And she realizes that China are teaching the alien how to play mahjong. And she's thinking, she was concerned that in teaching the alien that everything was a game of competition, 0-sum, one winner or one loser. Right. It's kind of like what you were saying about teaching your kids to play cooperative games, that would actually be really detrimental. And that kind of sparked a thought about the amount of conflictual and sort of competitive dynamics and discourses within humanity. Maybe working to reduce those could solve more problems overall.
I believe so. I totally do. And I think, if all of us are a little bit less competitive, I don't think it would hurt, overall. There's enough societal programming and pressures that will push, some amount of competition, which is also needed. But at the moment, we need to counter it. And the way to counter it is through collaboration rather than competition.
And can collaboration exist within capitalism?
Absolutely. So much of it is already proven to be the case. The internet, email, all of that is collaborative. Wikipedia. There are endless examples of collaboration. Right from in your community. I mean, COVID, huge amount of collaboration happened. And between just people, governments, everybody collaborated to get us out. We were in it together. We had to get out of it together. The scientific community collaborated, shared all of the genome sequences and all of those sort of things. So it was all in capitalism. Pharma companies definitely made their billions. I definitely think it can coexist, and it's healthier.
And when it comes to breaking free of labels and thinking more about things that aren't so binary, you mentioned in your book that the left haven't come up with a feasible economic framework or even just an alternative one that's clearly defined. How would you describe your book in terms of either sitting within or with outside of a political compass, and also just whether or not those labels are even beneficial.
Yeah, I think to the first point, that's why I think third way, makes a ton of sense, because you can do something different, versus one binary side or the other. Like sometimes you need labels just to organize stuff, right? Like, so organize people or groups or whatever. You need some labels, but overall they are unhealthy, because the problem with it is that you go from a helpful or useful label to then a broad brush, and then somewhere there's even a disconnect between the name of the label and what you think it is. So, and at that point it's like totally useless, because it's meaningless, right? Like when and I think that's the case with a lot of things, which and so we hold on to the belief and the label so tightly, but what it is, that it is on the other side, is something else. So there are a lot of situations where that's the case, and I think that's very unhelpful. So you really need to get down to the source, and really go from there. And so just sticking labels on stuff, I don't think it's like super helpful.
I would like you to succinctly describe to people who are listening why they should read your book and why it's important that as many people read your book as possible.
So I'd say, pretty early on in the book, that I don't expect everyone to agree with me. And I think that it's really important for us as a generation, as a society, to have a dialogue, to have think about these things meaningfully, do some sort of self-audit, see how conscious we are to certain things, see where we can improve. Ultimately, I don't think anything is really like bad, unless you're breaking the law. It's up to each one of us. So I'm not judging anyone here, and the idea is, just let's have this conversation. It's fine to disagree, but we need to think about the changes we need to make, and if we don't make them, nobody will.
I love that. Thank you very much, Arunjay, for coming on, having a very wide discussion across a bunch of topics. And I encourage everyone to check out all of the links in the description of all the resources mentioned, and most importantly, the book, Generation Hope. So thank you very much, Arunjay, for giving us your time.
Great. Thanks so much, Ali. It's been an absolute pleasure.